Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako, a weekly program on Think Tech Hawaii's broadcast network. I'm Kenli Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and I want to welcome you today. You can see behind me Santiago, Chile, because today I'm interviewing somebody who resides there now, but her heart is here in Hawaii. She's a graduate of Punahou School and represents some of Hawaii's finest young people who go and travel throughout the world as international young people. And we're going to just take a moment today to talk a little bit about leadership in the future, how emerging young leaders are developing, and I'm very proud today to welcome to the program Kenli Schoolland. Kenli, aloha.
Aloha, thank you for having me.
Welcome, always glad to talk with you, Kenli. And Kenli, you know, you are going around the world telling people what it is to be an international, and you are in many ways. Grew up in Hawaii, but you went off for college to Great Britain.
Yeah, I was quite lucky growing up in Hawaii that since both of my parents are teachers, they took me abroad in the summers, and so it just sparked this travel bug in me. And so I got very excited. As soon as I graduated from high school here, I moved to England for university. I just knew I needed to get out into the world.
You went to Buckingham and then you got your master's at the London School of Economics. That's quite impressive.
Right. Thank you.
And you've been working with causes to help advance freedom and economic development across the world?
Yes, after finishing my studies, I worked, I had an internship with the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii.
Yes.
And the Institute of Economic Affairs in London, a free market think tank. And for the past 5 years or so, I've been helping organize Austrian economics summer seminars in China.
Well, that's something, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Well, I want to let our audience know that one of the reasons I've invited Kenli to come on board is we need to be investing significantly in the future of Hawaii and the world, and the greatest investment we can make is in the education and the experiences that go into producing young men and women who will be emerging leaders all across the planet. And I thought that what Kenli is doing is so fascinating and interesting. While a lot of young people are pursuing merely commercial paths or merely a job, Kenli is, in addition to that, trying to bring economic freedom across the world. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that. What exactly is this idea of economic freedom?
Economic freedom is the idea that people can develop and grow the more that they can choose for themselves how to operate. And economically, we see throughout history and across the world that the countries that have the most freedom in terms of who you can do business with, who you can hire, how much you can produce, and how much you charge for the products that you produce. All of these things enable people to innovate more and trade more and grow.
Well, there's a country in which a huge amount of change is taking place, and you're one of the actors or players amongst maybe many, many millions who are trying to help China to experience greater economic freedom. Tell me a little bit about that recent conference you helped to sponsor, the Austrian Economic Summit in Shanghai.
Yes, so I'm half Chinese, and my mother, of course, has very strong ties with China. She grew up during the Cultural Revolution and experienced great suffering and starvation, and she really saw for herself firsthand what central planning is like. And so it's been her passion to bring these ideas of the free market and to China. A lot of us see China as growing, and it's free and it's capitalistic, even though it's under this communist regime. And the unique issue there right now is that people are doing it. They're trading and they're acting. They've embraced the free market, but without really realizing what it is.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Keep going.
They've never studied it in school. They've been taught communist, Marxist theory. They don't quite understand what's going on, but it's kind of part of human nature to trade with one another and to engage. So they've embraced it, but they don't quite know the theory behind it. And so what we've been doing for the past 5 years, we've had seminars in partnership with the Northeastern University in northern China. And in 2012 and 2014, we also held international conference in Shanghai.
Yes. Now, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You said that your mother lived under the Cultural Revolution, and she saw the results of central planning. And I know this because I know your mother and father very well. We're dear friends.
I think she's been on the show,
yes,
hasn't she?
Lee Schoolland. And she went through a period of time in which, in her daily living, in terms of the availability of everyday products, whether we're talking about food or fuel or anything you needed, she and her family suffered greatly because of the planning processes of the government.
Yeah.
So this is not merely theory.
Yeah, it's worse than that, because the central planners saw that, well, rice produced, it grew well in one area, and rice is the food of the peasantry, and it's the food of everyone needs it. So they just mandated that rice be grown throughout the country. And being central planners, they had no idea what the quality of the soil was in these places,
Sure.
anything. And so they were forcing crops that didn't work out. And
So you're trying to take forth the message that free markets that allow entrepreneurs to produce and provide for the people at a level at which people can actually say what they need and make their choices is a far better system than a central government controlling all of that.
Exactly. Just take in this situation of farming, in the countryside, who knows better what soil is, what can be produced best given the soil that's there, than the farmers themselves. They can see what resources they have, and they can also test out what demand there is, and they're responsive to that demand. So, so some soil in these areas is better for peanuts, and maybe that's not a staple food, but being aware of what you can make the most of, and what is needed out, or what people are wanting out in the marketplace, leads to more efficiency. And that's the core of free market thought, and the whole point is to be more efficient.
Now, we'll come back to that a little bit later on, but we started off by talking about the fact that you're an international. You see yourself as living in many countries, but it's not simply something you're doing for career growth or development. You're not commending that to others simply because it's good to have it on your portfolio. You actually have a message. I think that's quite fascinating, that you are trying to take a message across the world, and you're trying to bring about change. So tell me a little bit about how you did that in Shanghai at the Austrian Economic Summit.
About internationalization.
Yes.
At the summit, we didn't talk too much about internationalization. These
Or
are
at
my
least
two
about
different
the
worlds.
free market message that you brought across.
Yeah,
there.
so-
how was that done? How was that communicated to a largely Chinese audience? Isn't that right?
Yeah, so it's a unique process in China. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, was organizing that conference, because, as you may know, censorship is quite strict in China.
Right, we have
There's,
to shh.
yeah, they don't like people meeting in groups. They don't like organizations, think tanks, nonprofits, and so we had to really take a lot of care to stay under the radar. And so we organized a conference in a foreign hotel, because that affords a measure of protection. We weren't able to market on broad social media like we could here. For example, people would come to me and say, "Oh, we have this guy who's willing to promote us. He has 10,000 followers, but he's also watched by the government. So is it worth it or not?" So we had to make a lot of these difficult decisions in order to get the message out to as many people as possible, but yet not attract too much government attention.
What was the response of people in terms of coming to and taking advantage of the conference?
Yes, it's quite remarkable, actually. In China right now, there's a lot of people who are searching for meaning, I think. You can see it in the movies throughout China, and also just in what academics are searching for. So we came across a few groups of entrepreneurs who've been quite successful. But now they're trying to, like I said earlier, they're not quite sure about this market thing. They don't actually know if they're doing something good. And so we had a lot of people come to us, or were attracted to our event, because they're trying to learn about the theory of economics in the market, and to kind of understand if it's ethical or not what they're doing. And so we've had great interest from a lot of not only academics but entrepreneurs, which is something that's a bit unique to China. And it's been great. They host all kinds of events afterwards. We have a lot of meetups, a lot of social media groups. There'll be lectures on Austrian economics, which is another name for free market economics, and on WeChat, which is like the version of WhatsApp in China.
Well, now that you're talking about WeChat, you probably are connected with a large number of young people in China. Tell me a little bit about how the younger generation responds to free market principles, because all they have known is a centrally controlled government, economy by the centrally controlled government. So what do they understand about free market economics? How do they feel about it in their own country?
They're similar to the previous generation, because for people my age, they've actually only experienced capitalism, though they've not known it necessarily by that name. So they're receptive to it. They're heavy consumers. They're great fans of the market and shopping and eating out and things like that. So they've embraced it fully. But again, like I said, it's not necessarily intellectually, it's just in lifestyle. So I think while they may not realize it on paper, if you ask them certain questions, they may not believe it, but they would in reality be the biggest proponents of the free market, because they don't want to go back to what their parents and grandparents had to deal with.
And that's an interesting point you raised, that they may be enamored by consumerism, but not quite know how the free market produces those goods that they're so enamored with. We'll come back in just a moment from a short break. I'm Kenli Schoolland, interviewing a young woman who is really an emerging leader here in Hawaii and across the world, Kenli Schoolland. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about how she came to develop the values that she holds. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this.
Hi, I'm your host on Think Tech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, Think Tech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Aloha, welcome back to Ehana Kako. We're here every week on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network, and so I want to say mahalo to Jay Fidel and the wonderful crew that makes this program happen. I hope you've been enjoying listening to Kenli Schoolland in the first part of our program today. We decided to take a little bit of a break from talking to movers and shakers here in the political and business world of Hawaii, and to do a little bit of dreaming today, to see what it's like to talk to a future leader, an emerging leader, and to see what we can do listening to this young leader in terms of producing many others and inspiring them to change the world and to change Hawaii. And so I'm going to dive right back into my conversation with Kenli. Kenli, let me ask you this. How did you come to embrace the values you hold so strongly? You're not just traveling the world because it's professionally beneficial to be an international today. You have a message. You're taking, sometimes into difficult places, a message of the free market. Your father promotes the free market, Ken Schoolland. He's well known as a scholar who travels the world with his book, Jonathan Gullible. Your mother promotes the free market. She does the same thing, and they're both associated with our work at the Grassroots Institute. So was it just automatic that you had to grow up and be like mommy and daddy, or was there a process in which you came on your own to embrace what you believe today?
Yes, well, as a libertarian, it's part of my nature to want to rebel. So it's always this thing that I hate the fact that
that's the generational problem for libertarians.
Yeah.
You can't breed libertarians without having them rebel against you.
Well, actually, I mean, that's the thing that people comment about me, is that I didn't quite rebel against my parents. I grew up with my mother telling me I didn't rebel enough, actually. But for me, I felt that my rebellion was against, I mean, for me, it wasn't, I didn't need to rebel because they took the time to really explain things to me. And I've had, so I grew up with my father's stories of working in the Federal Trade Commission in DC and the terrible inefficiencies of bureaucracy there. And I grew up, like I said, with my mother's stories of central planning in China and how terrible, the millions and millions of deaths and starvation and hardship because of that. So I had really concrete examples of life experience. They weren't just telling me this stuff from theory. These were real cases. And so while I didn't rebel against them necessarily, my views were constantly being challenged from around me at school and things like that. So I never felt like I was just following it blindly. I was always having to think about these things and be challenged. And what really cemented it for me probably was every summer we would travel from about the age of 12, we would travel to emerging countries and teach at camps, teaching English and teaching ideas of liberty in places where they may not know what that's like. And so talking to students and hearing about the crazy policies in their countries and all the restrictions and all of these things that people are dealing with around the world really helped cement in my mind how important it is to have freedom.
You know, in our own country, there are young people who appreciate liberty and freedom, or think they do. When people say, I want to be free to be me, do what I want to do, and so forth, is that what you're really talking about? Or do you find that in our own country, many young people don't know what the philosophy of liberty really is?
Yeah, I mean, freedom takes many forms. It can be from what job you have. Some people think freedom is not having a boss, being able to be an entrepreneur and work for yourself. You can be free to travel with from different countries. You can have freedom to trade with a certain person or start a business. There's all different levels. And some people, I mean, and some of it can be just intellectual or emotional. You can say, if I'm not being held back by certain societal values or certain things, that I'm free. So there's a whole variety. My focus is in generally in political and economic freedom, because beyond that, anything in your mind is your choice, and that's a special pursuit. But
so what exactly is political freedom, and what exactly is economic freedom?
Yeah, political freedom is freedom from force and fraud, force primarily from the government. And so this can take many different forms. In some countries, it can be, most recently we're seeing a lot in terms of freedoms of speech, cracking down on dissent, ability to speak about your thoughts about the government. It can be the freedom to organize, freedom to meet up with other people, something we take completely for granted in the US. But in a lot of countries, as soon as you have 3 people in a place, they watch you, or they'll try to stop you from congregating because you could protest. There's freedom to marry who you want, freedom to theoretically have an abortion, freedom to, I mean, there's all these different things. I mean, but the idea is essentially that the government shouldn't have a role in making these decisions for you. If anything, it should just be protecting people from hurting one another, or from being hurt by someone else, and that should be the limit of it.
And what would you define economic freedom as?
Economic freedom, I think that as I covered earlier, is just the freedom to trade with one another, freedom to hire who you want, freedom to sell where you want for the prices that you want. The idea is that in a free market, people will have to respond to their customers. They will have to obey by the laws of supply and demand rather than laws set by a governing body.
We typically think, as Americans, that we have high levels of economic freedom and political freedom. And for the most part, we do in comparison to most countries in the world. But when we really take a closer look, that may not be the case. For example, there's a report that we circulated at the Grassroots Institute that lists individual countries in terms of their economic freedom.
Yeah.
The United States is usually listed somewhere between 13th and 15th place, whereas Hong Kong is in first place. China is much lower, somewhere in 50 and so forth. So,
exactly. The U.S. dropped out of the top 10 this year, and it's now behind countries, of course, Hong Kong, New Zealand, Singapore, but it's even behind the United Arab Emirates and Jordan, which are unlikely examples, but have shown how the U.S. is doing. And it's slipped also in corruption. In the Corruption Perceptions Index, it's also suffering.
And with all of this, how do we evaluate our own freedom here in Hawaii? I think if typically we're talking to someone on the street, they'll say, I'm free. But how do you've lived in Hawaii, you understand our economy and our political system. How would you evaluate the level of freedom here in this state?
Yeah, like I said, or like we were talking about earlier, Hawaii is quite, the U.S. is by no means the worst. There are certain aspects of it that still work, but the main issue when it comes to the U.S. is primarily bureaucracy. In Hawaii...
By bureaucracy, you mean the size and the inefficiency of government?
Yeah, the regulations. I mean, thousands of pages of regulation are released every day in the U.S.
Government control over processes to do business.
Every single aspect of business. You can, if you produce washing machines, there's specifications on how much water it can take, what size it should be, and how much energy it should take. I don't even, you can't even get started. Basically, if you can think of it, there's a regulation about it, and it's incredibly difficult to start your own business in less conventional ways. For example, just to become a hairdresser or something. If you just want to cut someone's hair, you can do it for free. But then as soon as you want to charge someone for it, the government steps in and says, no, you need a license, you need like 1,000 hours of training, you need to fill out an application and get this license. And these are things that we don't see on a normal, a daily basis because, well, I haven't tried to be a hairdresser. But these things are stopping people from just working, just producing.
Well, certainly Hawaii is one of the most regulated states in terms of industries anywhere in the nation. So that would translate, by what you're saying, into Hawaii perhaps not being as free as we think we are. So I'm just wondering how people perceive freedom. I'm not sure a lot of people are running around saying, I'm not free, I'm not free. Well, what do you think about that?
I think, well, I'd say that a difficult thing is that people are used to it.
Okay,
they've gotten
used to it.
Accustomed to this idea that you need to get a license to do something as simple as cutting hair.
Sure.
And so we've sort of accepted it. When you look at it, more closely, you think, well, wait, why? I mean, I could do this for free, and I could do it for myself. You know, and I'm not just talking about cutting hair. There's over 1,000 occupations that require a license. But yeah, people have come to accept it. And I think one issue in the U.S. is that it's bad, but it's not so bad that people are constantly complaining about it.
So there's a level of tolerance.
Yeah.
We tolerate because overall we seem to have the comfort that we want to have, the opportunity
if it takes
we want
a few months to start a business, I mean, that's unfortunate, but it's not like it's impossible. It's not years.
So then the discourse or the discussion about freedom actually might be might draw more interest in a place where there actually is less freedom.
Yes, there's something to be said about extremes and a complete backlash against it. So it's kind of the analogy of the frog in the pot. If if you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, it'll jump out immediately because it'll see this is this is terrible, I don't want to be in it. But if you put a frog in a pot of cold water and then slowly you turn up the heat, the water will slowly get hotter and hotter and hotter and eventually cook the frog because he's gotten accustomed to it along the way and didn't know to react. And I'd say that's what's
How
happening.
aware are your friends, your colleagues from high school here in Hawaii, your contemporaries, how aware and interested are they in the matters of freedom?
I would have to say not too interested. It's not really a topic that anyone wants to cover. Though I've started to see a rise in interest from issues like Uber and
Yes.
these ride-sharing companies that are being restricted by the government because it's something that directly affects them. They see, wow, this is a great service, it's a great idea too, and it's saving me money, it's efficient, it's up to date, and then legislation comes in that says, that tries to ban this. Airbnb, another example. I don't know what the situation is in Hawaii, but you see it throughout the US. And all of a sudden, young people are seeing these issues and thinking, wait, but that doesn't make sense. This is an awesome idea. Why are they trying to stop it?
So there's an illustration right in front of people of what the free
Exactly.
market is and how it might work and all the promise of it and what the highly regulated central control environment really produces, and it restricts their freedom.
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic, actually. I'll see on my Facebook newsfeed or something, a friend that's completely politically apathetic, just not interested at all, and they'll be posting protests for Uber or something like that and talking about how, this is good for the market. And I think it's great. And in a way, I'd say that that's the best way to promote freedom and economic freedom and political freedom, but just in terms of issues that affect people directly and that they feel the impact from. Theory doesn't always work.
Sure. Well, you've just explained something. Why in my lectures at the university on the Gosplan of the Soviet Union, the commanding heights and all of that, I get far less interest than people have in where they can get an Uber ride.
It's rational. It's acting rationally, not to be too emotionally invested in things that don't matter to you. So as long as you can find some connection to it, you can be interested in it. It's very hard to get too excited or too passionate about the economic situation in India, about property rights there, but because it has nothing to do with you.
Well, one of the reasons that I asked you to come on board here is because I think you're onto something. You're able to bring together that emotional aspect of an issue that is really down to earth and affects people with the level of theory or philosophy that's needed to inform people. And that's part of what you do. We're going to take a break in just a moment. And before we do, I want to just kind of get your mind thinking a little bit. What would you say to other young people who are finishing up their college years, who are thinking of their careers now and so forth? I know one of the things you do is consult others on becoming an international, and maybe you can address that a little bit. But what would you say in terms of taking who we are as Americans and sharing that value without dominating other people at the same time? We'll be right back after this, and I'll ask you to give your final thoughts. I'm Kenli Schoolland with the Grassroots Institute on our weekly program called Ehana Kako. We hope you'll be back, and you can watch this program and many others we produce all together at Think Tech, about 25 hours of content every week, and you can see these programs at thinktechhawaii.com. We'll be right back after this.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevelin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at Think Tech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday. Aloha.
Well, welcome back to our final segment today of Ehana Kako, and my guest has been Kenli Schoolland, a bright young entrepreneur of ideas, traveling across the world, currently living in Chile. She's been in China and all over, actually, promoting the ideas of economic freedom and liberty. And in this final segment, we're just going to chat a little bit now about what you might say to other young people. But before you do that, there was an interesting episode in your life when you were in the former Soviet Union's Georgia with your parents that kind of sums up what one has to be prepared for if you become an international.
Yeah, so I was talking to you about this earlier, and something that really stuck out in my life that really cemented these ideas for me was in 2008 when I was teaching at a Liberty and Entrepreneurship camp in Georgia, in the Republic of Georgia, and we were there, and people were talking about the fact that Russia was getting sort of involved in Abkhazia, in this sort of separatist region, but they said, oh no, don't worry, nothing will happen, because I mean Georgia is a favored partner of NATO and the U.S., and Russia would never dare do anything like that. And so when we were there, yeah, it's true, it didn't feel like anything was different, but just 1 week after we left, Russia invaded, and everything changed. I suddenly found that some of the students that I was just teaching with, my new friends, had a few of them, their hometowns were bombed. Some of them had jumped in cars and were trying to go and fight alongside the Georgian army. And I saw how incredibly quickly a person's life can be completely transformed. And we're seeing that now with Ukraine. The same exact thing happened with Crimea in Ukraine, and so much is happening now. The economy, of course, is floundering because no one wants to invest there, no one wants to do business there, and there are capital controls, and banking has been shut down. You can't withdraw your money from the bank. I don't know if that's still the case, but at least for a certain time. And so businesses are just have collapsed, and I mean, imagine what would happen if, all of your money is in the bank. You feel like that's a safe place, and you're told that.
That's right.
And
Well,
but if you can't access it, what good is it?
And that's exactly how people feel. They feel secure about their money in the United States.
Yeah.
But if we take a closer look as to our real stability, maybe we learn a lesson from the rest of the world. Now, let me ask you this. You recently did a seminar, a presentation on internationalizing yourself. Good advice to people who want to travel the world, but do so in a meaningful way. What are some of those things that you could share today?
Yeah, well, you touched on a very important point about how a lot of people think that their banks are safe in the U.S. We had a crisis, and the government came in and bailed banks out. So there's this idea that the government will always be there, and it can just keep things happening afloat no matter what. But the U.S. has $18 trillion in debt now, and unfunded liabilities of far over $200 trillion. And it's just, it can't keep up what it's been doing for so long. It's incredible that it's lasted this long, but that's only been possible because of the dollar is the world's reserve currency, which may not last as long as people think it will. And U.S. banks are severely undercapitalized. They have barely anything supporting them. If even a minor shock can lead to runs on banks and can lead to insolvency.
Sure.
And yeah.
And so how does this weigh into how a young person should be thinking about becoming internationalized?
Well, yeah, banking, that's something, again, young people don't think about as much because we don't have as much in terms of savings. But so I talk about internationalization, and the main 3 benefits that I see are protection of one's assets, which is what I was talking about there.
Put them in the Cayman Islands, no.
Maybe, that's an option. Yeah, there are many different options. The main thing is also you want to be safe in where you choose to bank, where banks are supported with capital, and the regime, the political atmosphere is sound, and all of these things. But it's also important not just picking one place like that, but a few places, because diversification is always
Very
a safe
good.
strategy. It works in investment, and it works in your own life. And so I see internationalization having the benefits of protecting yourself. Also, lifestyle arbitrage, which means you can take advantage of the different situations, and ideological reasons. And back to lifestyle arbitrage, you were asking me about some advice to give to
Yes.
students. And, well, actually, anyone. I think lifestyle arbitrage is just, that's the best way to take advantage of life, I think. You can use the skills that you have. For example, speaking English in the U.S. it's not that special of a skill. It's something we all have. But going abroad, all of a sudden you find that this skill that you've taken for granted, there's a market for it, and you can get paid quite well for it. And beyond that, skills of web design or social media, something that you do on a normal basis,
Right.
Can be valuable somewhere else. And lifestyle arbitrage can go in different ways. I tell a lot of people, students in high school, to think about going outside of the U.S. for college, because there's many places that are far cheaper with good quality education, and on the side you can even learn a second language perhaps. So at the end, maybe you can ideally end up when you graduate without debt and with international experience and another language. There's so many things to be gained by just thinking about things a little bit
Right.
differently.
And a resume that sports degrees from British universities,
Yeah,
which sounds quite impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, not just Britain, but China
Sure.
and Germany, all these places.
And you have studied in China as well.
Yeah, I studied Chinese in China and taught English on the side. SAT prep is also in high demand there. So I covered
Sure.
all of my tuition by working on the side.
Well, the points you raise are quite fascinating, because they're not the typical travelogue advice. Protect your assets for one thing. Leverage your lifestyle arbitrage. Tell us a little more about your third point.
My third point is an ideological one, and
Yes.
we've made it quite clear here that I travel not just for fun or not just for my career, but also because for me, freedom is very important. And I will admit that I'm quite disillusioned with the political system here in the U.S. and in most places, and I feel that my vote, ticking off a few names on a piece of paper, isn't actually enabling my voice to be heard. It's not really making
Sure.
a difference. We see people being very discontent with the system, but it continues, and you change the person in power, but the same policies continue.
Right.
And I got a bit tired of that. I grew up here campaigning a lot and doing all these things, but then now the way that I see it is just to vote with your feet. And again, you're a small voice. It's just one person, but at least I feel like it's a significant one. I'm saying that I don't appreciate how the government treats its people, and I think that there are places that do things better. And so I'm casting my vote on a political system by leaving entirely. And again,
And so
yeah.
that's why you live in Chile. We have Santiago right behind us here, and your apartment building is...
Yeah, right about where you were just pointing is where I live, actually.
And are you saying you've left and abandoned the United States, or are you saying you're living and working outside of the United States for a purpose of advancing liberty?
It's a mixture. I've not abandoned the U.S. I'm here. I have family here. I have a lot of ties to the U.S. But for personal life, for doing business and for working, I see it much. I've chosen to leave the US.
Well, one of the things I see is this: regardless of the personal choices you pursue ultimately in your life, the reasons for your choices are making you a stronger American ambassador, really, because our country was founded on the principles that you stand for: individual liberty, free markets, limited accountable government. And by taking a stand, you become a spokesperson for principle. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. It's great. It's a great opportunity to be able to go to places and to bring the knowledge that I have and the skills and the exposure that I've had to freedom in comparison to a lot of countries. And, you know, and not just from today, because the U.S. has a long, well, not that long relatively, but it has had a significant history with markets that we can take from more from the U.S.'s past to show examples of how its greatness came from a freer market. And so even if you look at today's
Right.
situation and some of the issues that there are today, there's still great lessons that can be learned from.
Well, Kenli, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
As you promote freedom and economic liberty across the world, I hope you'll bring your message back to Hawaii too, to keep promoting it here and in our country, and of course, continuing to do so across the world. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
My guest today is Kenli Schoolland, a true communicator of the principles of economic freedom and liberty across the world. And right now she's doing so in South America. I hope you'll follow her. I think you do have your own website with your credentials, kenlischooland.com?
Yes.
Okay, and I would commend that to everybody. Much aloha till next time on Ehana Kako on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Aloha.